Hello, and welcome to the Politicast. Today we'll be doing a breakdown of California's 25th district. Primary day is only a little over a week away, and so everyone's into their get out the vote phase. There's 4 candidates running for the 25th district's congressional seat. The incumbent, a Republican Steve Knight, a Democrat named Brian Caforio, a Democrat named Katie Hill, and another Democrat named Jess Phoenix. Let's talk about their bios. Steve Knight was an officer with the Los Angeles Police Department, a former soldier in the United States Army, and a member of Community Resources Against Street Hoodlums. This was also known as CRASH. It was an anti-gang unit throughout the 80s and 90s in Los Angeles. It had a notable scandal during the Rampart Division, and while there's no indication that Knight was ever part of that or wrapped up in it in any way, it is an interesting thing to note in his bio. It's worth noting that Simi Valley, an area of this district, is known as the place where all of the officers in the Los Angeles Police Department have a house. Brian Caforio's professional experience includes working as an attorney for a U.S. federal judge on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals and practicing law in Southern California. He ran for Congress in 2016 but lost to Steve Knight. He also has a dog, and he really wants you to know that he has a dog, as you'll see later on. Katie Hill's professional experience includes working as the executive director of the nonprofit organization PATH, or People Assisting the Homeless. She has worked to pass ballot measures that seek to address homelessness in California, and has a master's degree in public administration. Jess Phoenix is a geologist. Steve is focusing on a basic Republican platform with a few twists, specifically leaning further to the right on immigration and further to the left on some issues like net neutrality. Katie is taking a safe progressive path when it comes to issues. As you see with most of the candidates this year, the platform is more about who they are than what they stand for. Brian is running against Trump, and it's the first policy point on his website, followed by Medicare for All. He's favored by unions and is pushing an agenda that looks tailor-made to court funding from the DCCC. Jess is running an outsider progressive campaign with an emphasis on local development. Her platform and fundraising makes me think that she may have been more comfortable running on a state level. There really isn't anything defining about Jess other than her career as a scientist. As far as I can see, she hasn't done a good job distinguishing herself from the other candidates in terms of her platform. Let's talk about the district. California's 25th congressional district has both Los Angeles County and Ventura County. There's a small section of Simi Valley, Lancaster, Palmdale, Little Rock, Lake Los Angeles, and Santa Clarita inside this district. The demographics are 45.8% white, 8% black, through 7.7% Asian, 35.3% Hispanic, and 3.2% other or non-identified. When I was looking at this district, I noticed the little tail that curves off into Simi Valley. I worked in an election in the 26th district, which encompasses Simi Valley and Thousand Oaks before. That tail seems interesting to me and put there very much on purpose to encompass a certain demographic into the district. Whether it's to cut people out of the 26th district or to cut them in, I'm not quite sure. But I did look at what the district looked like before they made the changes in California, and it's quite interesting. This is the old 25th district. It's huge. It goes almost all the way up to Sacramento. It goes further north than San Francisco at one point. Now, granted, there's nobody in that part of California. It's mostly just wilderness, except for a few cities and side towns. Things like Barstow is a place that people only stop at when they're going to Las Vegas. But how could you even... There are people and voters up in the north section of that district. How could you ever campaign up there? It wouldn't be worth your money or your time to travel up there at all. It's probably a 5-hour drive to get to the north of the district from the southern end. Absolutely crazy. Let's look at some previous elections for this district. In 2016, Brian and Steve faced off, and Steve walked away with 53.1% of the vote. In 2014, there was no Democrat running, which is part of why it's so interesting that this seat is now considered a toss-up, when just 4 years earlier, there wasn't even a Democratic candidate that made it to the general election. Let's look at the turnout. In 2016, for the primary election, 132,000 voters went to the polls. For the general election in 2016, 261,000 voters went to the polls. We compare this to the 2014 general election, where only 114 people showed up to the general election and only 64,000 showed up to the primary. So this is a district that has traditionally faced a very steep drop-off in off-year elections. Less people came out to the general election in 2014 than came out to the primary for 2016. Now, part of that might have been the fact that it was a a vote between two Republicans. There was no Democratic candidate. So maybe there's a whole bunch of Democrats hiding in this district that showed up then for the 2016 primary. But my guess is that more than likely, the people who showed up in 2016 were there for the presidential election, not to vote for the congressional election. All right, it's time to talk about fundraising. The last report we have are from the 31st of March, so about 2.5 months ago. So these numbers have definitely changed since then, but I'm not sure when our next financial disclosure will be coming out here. Starting with Steve Knight, the incumbent has raised $1.2 million. Many of this was raised before the start of this campaign and was left over from the last campaign. He spent only $246,000, leaving him with over $1 million cash on hand going into the beginning of the primary. Katie Hill has raised $1.1 million, coming in just behind Steve Knight. She's spent $600,000 so far, leaving her with only $528,000 cash on hand. My guess is even though she's going to raise a lot in the last few weeks before the election, she's probably going to spend almost all of it. The cash that you have in your bank account doesn't matter if you lose the election, and it's a bad look if you go into a primary just expecting to win and don't spend almost all your money. This is a problem, though, that any challenger is going to face because Steve is basically guaranteed a spot on the ballot, so he doesn't have to worry about spending a lot of money in this primary. Katie and Brian are going to have to spend almost everything they have and then make up the difference in the fundraising during the summer before the November election. Jess Phoenix is lagging way behind here, raising only $401,000. She spent almost all of it and has only $57,000 on hand. Someone named Mary Plant didn't raise enough money to be talked about. I took a look through the financial disclosures to see if anything interesting popped out or if I could get an insight into what the candidates' strategies were. A couple interesting things popped out among the Democrats. Katie seems to be informing her field activities with data better than her competitors. That's a good sign, but there is reason to be concerned about a budget that consists primarily of consulting fees in a primary. I've seen consultant creep bring down candidates before, and this is something that could kneecap her in the general election. If I were a donor getting deadline calls and emails from Katie, I'd be worried my money was going to line SDK Knickerbocker's already sizable pockets, rather than going to a GOTV effort. Brian has a very large payroll, and it looks like he has been fully staffed for longer than the other Democrats. His communications include targeted mailing, TV ads, and digital ads. He's also dumped significant dollars into polling. Jess has been putting her money into staff and a digital media consulting firm. This, along with her social media presence and lack of any real field presence, makes me think that this is mostly an online campaign. Brian and Steve have the most exposure in the district due to their 2016 campaigns. However, Katie Hill was profiled by Vice's HBO show just a few weeks ago. The segment basically functions as a 20-minute long advertisement for her campaign. Jess has not gained much traction in the media other than an interview with the Young Turks. Katie has a less than stellar ad at the top of her timeline. I could see what the team was going for, but well, take a look. She should not be talking about policy right now. This is not the right time. And it's very awkward. Look, climbing up. Oh, can I hold on there? Oh, nope, not there. Okay. This doesn't say Congress to me. By no means is it the worst political campaign ever. We've seen plenty of much worse ads. But the thing is, political ads are not the time to get creative. Unless you're going to be funny, stick to the basics. Let's talk about endorsements. Katie has wrapped up significant endorsements from electeds, and really important ones like Lois Capps as well too, local activists, and organizations like Emily's List. Brian is endorsed by Gavin Newsom and a large number of unions, and Jess is endorsed by a local chapter of Our Revolution. Let's talk about what's going on in the field. Katie is killing it in terms of ground game. She has an active and well-managed social media account that is gathering moderate engagement, but more importantly, she has large numbers of volunteers going out and hitting the doors for her. This, combined with regular polling to help target her canvassing efforts and calling efforts, is what will make the difference in this election. Brian has had a very weak showing here. There is minimal engagement with the social media accounts, which mainly consist of the obligatory daily post whether or not there is anything worth saying. Brian has a dog. Brian donates blood. Brian has a poorly photographed mailer that is completely unreadable. Did I mention Brian has a dog? This is a terrible use of social media, and I'm not seeing any indication of an aggressive field team. It's important to note that appearing to have a strong field program is almost as important as actually having a strong field program. Jess is much more active on Twitter than Brian. She receives significantly more engagement, and her Twitter gives the impression that she actually is the one behind it, not just an intern posting things. It's unclear that the activity is translating to in real life action though. If Jess is going to run a grassroots campaign, as she claimed on the Young Turks, she needs to have significant amounts of volunteers going out and canvassing every day. The volunteers on an auto dialer every evening. Things like this need to be going on constantly. I haven't seen the evidence of this happening at a level that will deliver the results that are needed in an election of this size. Let's finish up with a summary and my predictions for what's going to happen in this race. First off, you may be wondering why I included incumbent Steve Knight in a video about a primary. Well, it's because California has a top 2 primary system. This means that Californians will go to the polls on June 5th and vote for all of the candidates, regardless of party. The 2 candidates with the most votes will then go on to the general election. This means that Steve is on the ballot in June, but practically speaking, he's guaranteed a spot in the general election. The real story here is between the Democrats. And you can see via messaging and endorsements that both Katie and Jess are targeting the progressive and minority voters of the 25th, while Brian is hoping to connect with the traditional Democratic and Union voters. This means Katie is going to be losing votes to Jess that she simply cannot afford to. Personally, I don't see a path to victory for Jess, and her name on the ballot is likely to help Brian. That being said, the quality of Brian and Katie's campaigns are a stark contrast. Much like his tired and outdated use of social media, it doesn't seem like Brian is really running in 2018. His campaign seems sterile and lacking real momentum, and this is something I've seen many times before with union-backed campaigns. If I had to guess, I'd say Brian's campaign team is relying on union voters to turn out in droves for a massive GOTV push in the last 2 weeks of the campaign. That's not a smart choice in my opinion. Unions are generally much more successful with getting out the vote, but Trump is all the GOTV you need, so this primary is all about persuasion. Persuasion is what Katie Hill has been doing a lot of and doing correctly. Katie is the candidate that is projecting the most momentum going into the primary. She has effectively utilized endorsements, social media, and what appears to be a robust field program to craft a consultant's dream campaign. A highly paid consultant. Several of them. Despite a less than great campaign ad and a campaign manager needs to clean his house before allowing Vice reporters into it, Katie seems to be running an A+ campaign. It's going to be close, but I think Katie Hill will narrowly beat Brian Caforio and will be facing off against Steve Knight in the general election. I have Jess Phoenix pulling in single digits here. It's too early to make meaningful predictions about the general, but it looks like, to me, Democrats will have to wait another 2 years before they turn the 25th blue. Katie's going to be facing a huge fundraising gap after the primary, and it's unclear how much support the DCCC will be able to put out this year. Things could change before November, but that's where they stand now. If you like what you saw, the Politicast is also on Twitter, Minds, and Facebook. Feel free to subscribe. We'll have a weekly podcast coming out every Sunday, and more district breakdowns coming up.